Nature of Society Part 4 Session 5R. We began last week by looking at the importance of research as an eventual asset in a country's bag of assets as far as education and development of a country was concerned. We said that for a developing country, there is a very important activity that it must engage in if it is to attain developed country status. It must do all the necessary robust research into those goods and services that it could manufacture as added value or finished products that it could offer to the world from its resource base. Many times the technological know-how resides with developed countries, and there may be the need to invite the technology in. Many times, though, when this is done, there is no technological transfer, either wittingly or unwittingly. The receiving country must ensure that they have set up such contracts or systems that the technology transfer does take place. The technology must be made to eventually reside ultimately in the archives of the country and not in local individuals. There is much research that could be undertaken by the developing country without the assistance of foreign entities. A spirit of research must be fostered at the universities and other learning institutions, which must be adequately funded by private funding into all areas of viable activity, all areas that will advance the sustainable development of the country. The results of this research must be brought forward into the public domain unless it is proprietary research, so that it may add to the general education of the country. Over time, the country will begin to reap the benefits of this. Another area of deficiency in most developing countries, which would have been mentioned elsewhere, is the deficiency of data upon which to make the most informed decisions. The culture of gathering and collating data that is relevant to any development issue is to be encouraged throughout all public and private institutions, and this data should be published and updated regularly. This would inform as well as drive decision making. Too many countries rely on external sources for its internal data, which may not be the best option as far as accuracy and the context are concerned. Both the culture of research and the gathering of data are indeed medium to long-term projects, but these must be seen, even though there may be unknown costs attached, as an essential part of sustainable development. The difference and distinction between developed and developing countries is primarily in record keeping, data collection, and decision making, based on information from real data. What gets measured gets managed, and the more current and accurate this data is, the better managed outcomes are possible. There is of necessity going to be medium and long-term schedules of implementation for this program, as you may well imagine, to convert what is now existing into the new, more progressive approach to education. Medium and long-term schedules for implementation. To implement these suggested changes, the education system would take up to 10 years and would require some outlay of funding in this time frame. The shift from state-run primary and secondary schools to one that is a partnership between the public and private sectors would at first require some marketing and convincing of the community. Statistics showing the better results of privately run schools would be helpful in this regard. If the community could be convinced that a sounder education system will be had by this move, they will quickly come on board. The fact that schools will now be run directly by education management professionals, and that they will be held responsible rather than some ministry that is far away from the action, will appeal to many. The new system, which will stress less urgently on certification and will seek to educate the individual over the long term, will lead to less stress in parents concerned about their child's success. The fact that more diversity of education will be offered based on the students' true talents, leanings, and passions will also be a source of comfort to them. Less boredom or anxiety or frustration in the classroom should make for a happier school environment than is now the case. Some schools will have to be converted to accommodate the new curriculum initially, whether they be schools majoring in drama, music, sports management, technical, vocational, or academic grammar. Teacher training colleges and universities will also have to increase their ability to provide these new teaching subjects. There will have to be more adult education centers and more teachers specially trained in this area. The Education Service Commissions will have to be revamped to cater to these new mandates. An overarching management committee or commitment or committees would have to be set up to project manage this entire education renovation project with established vision, goals, objectives, strategies, and action plans to meet specified completion deadlines. Annual audits would need to be carried out to determine whether projects remain on schedule or if they have fallen off. What needs to be done to rectify? Funding would need to be in place throughout the entire venture, and in an SVT environment, this should not be difficult. Part of the exercise would be to determine if the new graduates from this new education system is up to measure, and whether the institutions out of which they come are up to measure. If adjustments are to be made, this should be carried out and the corrections incorporated into the institutions that are not yet established. The entire undertaking is not going to be easy, but with vigilance and faith and confidence, the system would produce a better educated and contributing citizen who is better rounded and satisfied that he is pursuing his passion. This venture would be well worth it. What about this? What are your comments on this entire scheme? We begin this second half by considering the whole subject of labor, and we begin with a quote regarding the condition of labor written in the late 18th century by a famous economic philosopher, David Ricardo. When the market price of labor is below its natural price, the condition of labor of the laborer is most wretched. The poverty deprives him of those comforts which custom renders necessaries. It is only after privations have reduced their number, or the demand for labor has increased, that the market price of labor will rise to its natural price, and that the laborer will have the moderate comforts which the natural rate of wages will afford. It's taken from On Wages, the Principles of Economic, Political Economy and Taxation. It is common knowledge worldwide that the price of labor is well below its natural level, not only because it cannot afford the necessaries of life without assistance, food, shelter, education, and health services, but more fundamentally, is not at its natural demand level, because many valuable sites are either held out of production or are underproducing. Currently and globally, only a fraction of persons on the planet can easily afford these four basic necessaries of living without some form of assistance from the state. This is because, as mentioned in an earlier session, there is imbalance or disequilibrium between the factors of production, land, labor, and capital. These factors are not on parity, and it is the principal reason why labor cannot really afford land or capital. As long as this state of disequilibrium exists, there will be the perennial dissatisfaction with wage settlements, as they seem not to ameliorate the price of goods and services that are being confronted with. The phenomenon of wage and salary disputes, strikes and lockouts, and a general lack of industrial peace will continue to be the order of the day if labor continues to be lesser in value to capital and land values. Even in boom conditions, it is seen that there are still substantial numbers of working poor. There are also shortfalls in affordable housing, and food prices and health costs are beyond the reach of many. We also notice that even in boom conditions, there are many valuable sites that are unused or underutilized, and there still is a fair degree of unemployment. If these inactive sites could be brought into productive use, would not unemployment be significantly reduced? Would not the wage levels rise because of the increased demand for labor? Would not the purchasing power of wages also increase to a level that brings it on par with land and capital values, such that it could now purchase these factors? Think of the tremendous increase that we will now have in the production and output of goods and services, and the consequent increase in wealth of the community, and more importantly, all individuals in the community. The opening of these inactive valuable sites, and all valuable sites for that matter, could easily be achieved by applying site value taxation to them. This would also be the most effective way to bring parity to the factors of production: land, labor, and capital. By this approach, labor prices would rise to its natural level, making them able to afford all the necessaries for living, particularly food, shelter, clothing, and health services. In this scenario, it is easy to envisage the revival and sustainability of small and family business, which provides the bedrock of employment for all countries worldwide. With this, the important processes of mentorship and apprenticeship at these small businesses will be facilitated. Mentorships and apprenticeships were the original ways in which technical and professional skills were honed in the centuries past. It is also the way that skills requiring time to develop and be transferred were facilitated. And in an SVT environment, the apprentice or mentee would be adequately paid, although still learning the trade or profession. That should read skills were honed. Another important benefit would be the generational sustainability of these family and small businesses, which, when their products and services are perfected, could lead to the reputational establishment of specialty goods and services of world renown. There are clear examples of this. For example, the Swiss with their chocolate, confectionery, and watch timepiece industries. The winemaking industries of France and Spain are other examples. Nowadays, if small businesses survive beyond 5 years, they are considered fortunate, and the clear majority of them, over 80%, failed within this period. The certainty of employment that SVT would provide allows the state to more precisely plan at providing educational and training places for the specific economic activities envisaged. In the current setup, places are provided without guarantees of job placements after graduation. In the developing world, graduates then must seek employment or better employment opportunities in developed countries, which seriously affect and retard development growth. In an SVT economy, the necessary research can now more easily take place, where the professional, skilled, and semi-skilled human resource demands of a country can be determined periodically. When the inevitable economic downturn arrives, adjustments to the SVT can be made to ameliorate such that the factors of production remain in balance and trade continues to take place. With the factors of production combined, there will be the production of goods and services, and the balancing of these factors will certainly facilitate this. We can foresee the positive impact that this will have on the work ethic of the developing world. As labor prices rise to their natural levels, there will be greater purchasing power, and more goods and services will be consumed and produced. There will be more happiness and contentment, and the need for civil protest and unrest will go away. Market forces being brought into balance, which SVT would facilitate, would remove the perennial standoffs between labor and capital. Gainful employment will now be there for those who seek it. Self-employment and small business entities will thrive, and the state will now have increased revenue and less responsibility to now adequately treat with matters of the realm. Most importantly, those citizens who cannot adequately take care of themselves because of disabilities, infirmity, or old age will find an adequate guardian in the state. It should be reiterated that labor price levels, salaries, and wages will be determined by what the market will allow, and not primarily by labor negotiations. These would be set annually in line with the annual setting of the site value tax on all valuable sites nationwide. This would be explored fully in a later session. This is a far better option than union-employer negotiations, which in the past, the results were not satisfactory to the worker, where his pay packet still cannot meet the cost of living. With the opening of sites that SVT would allow, the employer or site owner will now have to raise his wage offer to what the market naturally offers for that skill or profession if he is to attract the worker. Labor unions can now better serve their memberships by locating and suggesting educational, training, and social welfare programs, to name a few. Social welfare programs can include employee programs that treat with social, psychological, and family issues and problems, which are assuming greater prominence in the workplace currently. The adverse effect of inflation on wages and salaries, which is a perennial problem for both wage earners and unions, will be significantly eliminated in an SVT environment. Inflation, if not imported, is caused when land and capital values rise faster than labor values within a country. There is then the imbalance between the factors of production. A site value tax would lower land values and encourage labor and capital to utilize the site. When the factors come together in this way, supply and demand are equalized and the economy is stabilized. The foreign inflation can also be eliminated over time by producing the same goods and services, if possible, as a form of import substitution if it can be produced cheaper. Site value taxation could easily allow firms or persons to joint venture with external partners who may have the expertise in the production of a good or service that may be lacking and wanted within a country. This could lead to transfer of skills and technologies and rapidly increase a country's assets in this regard. The external partner would benefit from a favorable and internationally competitive tax environment that SVT would allow. Generally, business would benefit from a more productive work environment, as discussed earlier. Most importantly, SVT will allow all individuals to pursue the vocation, profession, trade, calling, or craft of his or her choice, without concern for whether an economic living could be had. Too many persons today are engaged in employments which are not of their first calling or passion. This is because the current economic system is very restrictive and does not allow many goods and services to be produced and thrive. As a result, there is much demoralization in the working world, with many persons just resigned to their fate and just biding their time to their retirement. Allowing persons to contribute in their preferred calling will imbibe the economy with new energy and will redound to a wealthier community as a greater variety of goods and services will now become available. We can now comment on the pending threat that robotics poses to the laboring classes and the perception that this can severely reduce its numbers in the future. This is certainly true in the current economic system, where land and capital is not easily accessible. But under SVT, no such threat is possible. With SVT, the accessibility and use of land would go up markedly, and all hands would be needed to bring these sites into economic use. As good as robots are in today's technology, they will never replace humans in our collective lifetimes in an SVT regime. The speed, flexibility, and intelligence that will be needed could not be supplied by robots. These then are the progressive reforms possible under an SVT regime. What additional comments do we have of these? Next week, we will continue our discussion of the subject on a new subject, health and social development. Before we end, I would like again to let you attendees know that Unsustainable Development is an educational offering devoted to the dissemination of its course to all of mankind and to those who have the English language as their official language in the first instance, and to all eventually all over the world. We have in fact been sending this course all over the English-speaking world with very favorable responses. To continue to make this possible, and because we do not charge a fee for this dissemination, we rely wholeheartedly on monetary donations to meet the cost of achieving these goals. If you have found these sessions useful thus far and would like others to have access to them, we would gratefully accept your donations should you be inclined to offer them. You can send donations to our PayPal account at the email address nigelgittins@gmail.com. Thank you for your kind gesture.